being here. So excited about this evening. Of course, you know, here at St. Austin, we provide a Catholic classical liberal arts education, which trains the mind and hearts of our students. Well, we're privileged tonight to have with us Miss Colleen Richards, who is an expert in the area of liberal arts education. So excited to have her here to share with us that knowledge. Colleen is ICLE's new Director of School Services. She leads teacher training and school advising efforts around the country. After 17 years of teaching experience in a variety of Catholic elementary and high schools, 8 years ago, she was the headmaster of St. John Bosco Schools in East Rochester, New York. Colleen led the school's adoption of the St. Jerome Academy educational plan, training teachers and growing the school to double its size. In 2014, she led the opening of Chesterton Academy of Rochester as part of the new Chesterton Schools Network, making an institution an option for a complete Catholic education from pre-K through 12th grade. She earned her bachelor's degree from Canisius College, a master's from University of Phoenix in curriculum and instruction, and she holds a New York State teacher certification. Please join me in welcoming Miss Colleen Richards.
Well, thank you, Jerry. And thank you to all of you who are here present, and also a little shout out to those who will be joining us online. It's truly a pleasure to be with you here today. I was joking with Jerry earlier that, wow, I feel like I'm giving a TED Talk or something. It's usually kind of, in the school gym, and maybe I'm just shouting instead of using a microphone. But I think most of you in this room, probably everyone who's listening to this at all, can really relate to that kind of setting and have a certain affection for it as well. So it really is a pleasure to be with you here today. This talk tonight is called Educating Humanity. Let's see if the clicker works. Yeah. The Catholic Liberal Arts Education. I am from the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. And I'll just draw your attention to the title for a minute because you notice that we're not called the Institute for Catholic Classical Education, though many of our member schools do call themselves classical schools, and rightly so. That's where the tradition we're talking about tonight has its origins, is in the classical tradition, ancient Greece in particular. But instead, what we focus on is how the church has taken up that classical tradition and truly made it her own, has really enriched it, built it, and developed this great work of education over the course of centuries. And it is a liberal arts education, and just in case there's any confusion, we don't mean that in any political sense at all, but rather in its true root word sense, from liber in Latin, meaning free. That a liberal arts education is one that frees our students' minds to grasp the truth of things. And really what that freedom is oriented toward is our true freedom in Christ, is our freedom as the true sons and daughters of God. So to have an academic program, a classroom academic program that corresponds to that lofty goal every step of the way is truly a blessing. And you here at the St. Austin School, I think you know that. I'll try to put a little more flesh on that tonight as we go along. But it's just a beauty and a joy to be here. I got to visit classrooms today in the St. Austin School, at a school which has just been enriching itself in this mission for the past 10 years. It's a very beautiful thing. There are a lot of competing ideas about what education is all about. And so that's what we're talking about. What does it mean to educate humanity? What does it mean to educate your children, your grandchildren, the children here in these classrooms? What is going to help their human flourishing to the greatest extent? And this word, telos, or some say telos, it's Greek. And let me just back up for a moment here. In case there's any confusion, I'll set the record straight from the beginning. My education, personally, through my high school and undergrad and grad school and teacher certification, had almost nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. It was very much in the modern tradition. I know, it's kind of contradictory. Very much in the modern way, all right? And when I started at St. John Bosco Schools in 2011 as headmaster, I looked around at a group of teachers, 2/3 of whom were new, and we all looked at each other and said, what is this kind of education anyway? What are we doing? So what I'm sharing with you tonight is what we've learned. And I'm very much a student of it right now. I chuckle every time someone like Mrs. Dolan refers to me as an expert. We are rolling up our sleeves and engaging in the mission right alongside the teachers and parents at these schools, these little schools all around the country. But we're going to start with this word telos, which I learned from our middle school students at St. John Bosco. Walking into the classroom one day, the teacher said, "Hey, students, ask Miss Richards if she knows what telos is." And I went, "No, I don't. Can you tell me?" Well, telos is basically a word that indicates purpose. What is the telos of a thing? Is what is the purpose of the thing? What is the purpose, for example, of education? What is education for? And if we can answer that question confidently in a way that really addresses the entirety of the human person, well, then we have a path in front of us, something like this. Not that you necessarily know every step, but you know where you're going. I understand what education is for. And so I'm accumulating a new set of principles by which to judge everything. And the way to know if our principles are right, the way to know if our education is right, is really seen in the faces of the children, even when they have to wear those masks. You can still see it, because they are happy. When we get education right, we see children who flourish. So having this understanding of what's our telos is really, really important. Many, really all parents, they want their children to be happy. They also want their children to be successful. And what does it mean to be successful, right? And that's the question that we have to ask over and over and over again. We want to prepare our students to be good citizens in this world so that they can be happy with the saints in heaven, as a saint in heaven in the world to come. So all of that has to do with telos. The push very much now in modern education, one of a number of pushes, is for STEM education. And what we really need to do, what the purpose of education is to some, is let's make sure I have an electronic device in the hands of every single one of my students. And let's make sure that we don't use books or paper anymore, but that everything's digital and everything is on the screen. Well, is that what education is for? I would encourage you to look up this talk that's mentioned here by a friend of our institute named Michael Ortner. He was the founder, CEO of a very of a flourishing IT company. I believe he sold it now, but anyway, he knows what it is to flourish in the STEM world. All right, he knows what it is to make make his living that way. He knows what it is to really thrive on that kind of tech world success. But he gave this talk at our national conference about 2 years ago, From Greeks to Geeks, the classical liberal arts as the best foundation for STEM. And in fear that maybe not everybody will watch this video, I'm going to tell you a bit of it. Michael Ortner used to hire for his company interns from the local tech-type college, right? He would get those students who really knew the tech stuff so he could really support his company, they would get the internship they needed. It was win-win. And one year, something happened where some of those internships fell through, and he found himself short by a couple of interns with nobody at the tech college to be able to fill the gap. And someone he knew helped fill the gap with these two students who came from a classical liberal arts school, Christian, I believe, in the local area. And he was really annoyed. Whoever's job it was to line up the interns really blew it, and now he had two kids who don't even have a tech class in their school, and now they're his interns. And he tells a story in this video about the various ways in which these two students from the classical school outshone all the college students with their tech experience. How he discovered that he could put these students into customer relations because they could listen to people and speak to them and knew how to be hospitable and welcoming and problem solving that way, and also in the tech business itself. He described a project that hit his desk, hit Mike Ortner's desk, and he right before the weekend, and he went, "Oh, this is a tough one. This is probably going to take me 10 hours to get this project finished." Only to arrive Monday morning, I think around 10 o'clock in the morning, and have the finished project sitting in his inbox, done by one of these students from the classical school. And he tracked down the student and said, I really hope you didn't spend your whole weekend doing this. That's not what you're supposed to do as an intern here. He said, "Oh, no, I got here around 7:30. It took me a couple hours." It took you a couple hours. And reviewing what the student actually did, what the intern actually did, it was all right. It was all correct. And so since that time, Mike Ortner says he doesn't get his interns from the high-tech college nearby anymore. He goes instead to the ones who know how to think and to the ones who know how to learn, the ones who have been trained in the classical liberal arts. These are some photos from the first grade class at St. John Bosco schools. And you see a young lady over here who is just as strong as she looks, God bless her, at the first and sixth grade Olympics that they have every year. She's holding the torch. They do discus throw with a frisbee. They do chariot races on the little scooters, and the big kids pull the little kids with jump ropes, and just got to make sure you're not too close to the wall, that's all. But they study ancient Greece all year long. But I have this slide up here because of the quote that's listed, and I think this is from Plato. "The ignorant will always be ruled by tyrants." I first saw that printed in the hallway on that paper. You know, the lines are about this big, and they had the little dotted line in the middle, right? The first grade paper. And it said on there, printed out manuscript from Lucy, was signed Lucy, "The ignorant will always be ruled by tyrants." So I tracked down their teacher at lunch, Mrs. Matina. I said, "What are you doing? What is this?" She goes, oh, you should have heard the conversation we had with the first grade, because this was in September. She said, "We started off the year talking about why are we in school with first grade." And the students gave some answers, what they thought they were in school for. And the teacher presented this statement, "The ignorant will always be ruled by tyrants." And really, there are only about 2 words that you need to introduce to the first graders. They can understand ignorant, and any of them who've had an older brother or sister understands what a tyrant is once you tell them what it means. And they also understand that they don't want to be ruled that way. It's alarming how relevant that is. It's kind of too bad that it is so very relevant, but it's part of the human condition. It's one of those truths about human nature that, the sooner our students know this, the better it is. What better motivation do we have to engage fully in our education than to avoid that? There really are higher motivations, but this one's going to work. This one's going to work with your students for sure. So what's to tell us? What's the purpose of education? How do we educate humanity? All right, why did God make me? right? Not only what is education for, but what's the human person for, right? What's the highest good that you want for your sons and your daughters? What's the highest good you want for your students, your grandchildren, whoever it is, for yourself? What's the human person for? Well, the catechism said, God made me to know, love, and serve him in this world so I could be happy with him in the next, right? Why did God make me? What does it mean to be human? And what does human flourishing look like in my family, in my classroom, in my community, in my country? What does it look like? The beautiful thing about this kind of education is that we're constantly asking our young people to consider those questions. What does it look like in my family, in my community, etc., when people are flourishing, are really doing well? Does it look like I am working from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night every day? Is that what human flourishing looks like? Does it look like the exercise of the virtues? Certainly it looks like the exercise of the virtues. Does it look like I have loving relationships with my mom and my dad, my sisters and my brothers, with the people who live on my street? And how can we do that? It's one very, very important way that we do that, to build those relationships. And we're going to talk about this a lot tomorrow too. We really have to restore the centrality of story. And I know that's something that is already being done at the St. Austin School. Got to hear some stories today, some very, very good ones. But putting story at the center of education is really going to educate the humanity of our students. Why? Well, I'm going to give you 3 reasons. Children love stories. We all love stories, right? We're still watching movies. We're still watching whatever. We're reading stories. We read the Gospels, right? We have the story of the greatest story ever told, the story of our Lord Jesus Christ. Children especially love stories. And if you tell a child a story, they're engaged, they're listening, they want to hear all about it, and they can tell the story back to you. They remember it. It engages their memory because they're interested and they care. The next thing that's important about story for children, for the class especially, is that we're talking about the beginning and the middle and the end. And we have a sequence of events, and the longer the story, the more events there are, right? And so there's this intellectual thing that's going on as far as sequencing, seeing cause and effect, being able to talk about how did this character manage to do such and such, and why was this ending up this way? So there's an intellectual engagement with story as well. And the third reason story is so important for our students is that it's because of the moral questions that occur in every part of the story. Every story has a conflict. Every story has one decision being made after another. Fairy tales are famous for this. You can read a good fairy tale, and you might encounter 6 or 8 or 10 moral decisions on a single page. It's engaging these questions of what should so-and-so do all the time. What should this person do? What's the right thing to do? What's the prudence? What's the other virtues that should be coming into question here? And students are fully engaged in that, deciding how should we live. So what are we talking about here? Story is important because it engages the memory, it engages the intellect, and it engages the will, which you may remember are the 3 faculties of the soul. The 3 faculties of the soul are memory, intellect, and will. And just to the thought that in my own classroom, I have the capacity to engage the 3 powers of the soul of the students in my classroom through the use of story is thrilling, really, to consider that, wow, in a Catholic school, I have this ability to engage the 3 powers of my student soul and leading them to Christ. And many times, as I said, maybe it is the story of Christ. Maybe it's a story about a saint. but maybe it's not. It could be a story about anything. It can be that fairy tale. It can be a story that was written before the time of Christ. It could be, you name it. Story's going to help to do this, to form the memory, intellect, and will of our students, so that they can be in right relationship with one another and with God. Oh, there we are. The importance of story. And the beautiful thing about it is that students love school because of it. So let me give you an example. When I started at St. John Bosco School, as Mrs. Dolan mentioned, we were adopting a new educational plan, the educational plan of St. Jerome Academy. It's kind of famous. You could look it up. It's a beautiful document. And so we were starting with kind of a brand new curriculum. And I remember that our middle school students were learning about the Civil War. That was what was coming up. And I was planning with a few of the middle school teachers together. We wanted to find a work of literature that was going to correspond with this period in history, and so that they could see the integration more fully. And naturally, we thought of Uncle Tom's Cabin, since it had such a historical significance, as well as being a beautiful piece of literature. And the teachers and I just looked at each other, and we went, I don't think they can do it. I don't think they're ready. I don't think they're really reading at that level. And we just looked at each other and we knew it was true. We just knew. So we ultimately decided, well, you know what? Let's get the books. We can read some of it with them. They'll be in the shelf. They'll be on the library. And future classes will use them, whatever. So the books came in. And the teacher started right in chapter 1. And I heard the griping. I heard the griping from the hall. We don't know what these people are saying. A lot of dialect in there. So the teacher did kind of the usual thing and found the audio book, right? So the kids could start listening and start going, oh, maybe I do know what these people are saying, right? They kind of got over that hump to begin with. And some time went by. And I was standing in the hallway the day that the teacher said to the class, tonight you're not going to read chapter 10. Tonight, I'm going to tell you what happens in chapter 10, and tonight I want you to read chapter 11. And it was that kid that we all had in our mind when we said, oh, they can't do this. It was that kid who said, no, don't tell us. Don't ruin it. We want to read it for ourselves. I went, oh, my goodness, it's true. It's true what they said. That literature, it's only common sense. It's a whole work. It's a whole piece of art that should be presented to our students in its fullness, in its integrity, so it can be fully enjoyed. Would we take the Mona Lisa and cut out, just the smile or just the corner or just half of the face and say, I think this is all you can handle? We would never do that, right? We would never do that. And whether it's some mystery of the faith or a beautiful piece of art, or even a novel that may be a bit above them, we give it to them as the whole. And they learn to love that piece of literature, that piece of art, and they even go back to it in the future to appreciate it more deeply on a new level. So we definitely learned our lesson that day. And in contrast, I got thinking about what did I do in middle school, I received the tome, the literature anthology. It's about this thick, and it weighs roughly 20 pounds, I do believe. And we carried that same book every day, all during middle school. High school, we had them too. And so what did we do? If we read Uncle Tom's Cabin, it was about 7 pages long, which was just enough time to experience the dialect and feel the frustration that I don't know what these people are saying. And then we'd spend a day or two on that, close the book, and go, I'm never going to read that one. And that was pretty much my literature experience through the whole literature anthology. It was kind of a lengthening of the list of books I'm never going to read. Unfortunate. And I'd like to read. Okay, I mentioned this. Pardon me, I got a little bit off the sequence here, but that's all right. All right, here in the center, we know who that is. Jesus Christ, our King, right? Who else do you see? Whom do you recognize? Say it out loud, nice and loud. Frederick Douglass, good. Who else? Esther. People, nobody gets Esther. I love the book of Esther. She's over on the left with the king holding the scepter out to her. Who else? Washington crossing the Delaware. Anybody else? Saint Cecilia on top in marble. Yes, not denying the Trinity or the two natures of Christ. Yes, Blessed Miguel Pro, bottom right, Jesuit priest, I believe. Great story to read. What an enthralling biography you can read about him. Okay, let's see. Bottom right are the ships before Troy. I think Florence, somebody said it, I think. Florence Nightingale, she's in there. Marcus Aurelius is in the top right. And on the top left, excuse me. And on the right side, one of my favorites, that's King John Sobieski of Poland, who saved Vienna when it was under siege from the Turks, even though it was going to be bad for Poland for him to help out Vienna. But he did it to save Christendom. So, a lot of heroes we can tell our children about, a lot of stories that we can use to enrich their souls. And those were stories of history, but we have stories all over the place, right? From scripture, from the fairy tales, like I mentioned. One that our teachers really raved about, Pinocchio, the original Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, the seminarian, actually. Went in the Willows, C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Odyssey, Iliad, Aeneid, Aesop, the Divine Comedy. It's funny, one of my first hires as a head of school, I hired a teacher who had never really been in an elementary school. She had been homeschooled her entire life until college, went to Providence College in their Western Civilization program, and I threw her into the 4th grade. Here, teach these kids. So the funny thing about it is that particular teacher did not know what 4th graders could not do. And she taught us all a lesson that 4th graders could do a lot of things that we had no idea they could do, including they were reading parts of the Divine Comedy, the Anthony Esselin translation, which is pretty impressive, and understanding it and enjoying it. And I remember asking her, so how's Dante? And the teacher said, well, we're in purgatory right now, but the kids really like it. Well, I'm not sure if that's theologically sound, but okay, good. The Canterbury Tales, another one. Our 3rd graders would read not the Middle English, but a child adaptation of the Canterbury Tales. They'd memorize the first 14 lines. They would travel and recite it from class to class while they were dressed up in pilgrim's garb and collecting prayer intentions as they went because they were on pilgrimage. They would end up in the school chapel where they would pray the rosary for all the intentions of the people that they were with that day. So stories are our starting point for so much more, right? I wanted to tell you about this teacher, Lisa Tran, and she's from Holy Innocents School out in Long Beach, California, and she's only been teaching, I think it's 2 years, maybe year 3 right now. And Lisa said she went into teaching, she thought she wanted to be a teacher, and after her first year, she was very discouraged, and I think it was 3rd grade. Very discouraged, and she said the worst thing that would happen is her students would ask her, why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to do this? And she said the discouraging thing about it is she didn't know the answer. Well, we have to because we have a test coming up. We have to because we're working on our test skills. She didn't have a good answer for them. And Lisa talks about when they made a transition to a classical curriculum or Catholic liberal arts curriculum, everything changed. And her students were engaged in what they were learning. They were interested in what they were learning. They wanted to be in school. And she said, nobody asked her anymore, why do we have to learn this? And she said that, unfortunately, this time I knew the answer. But nobody asked the question anymore. Pope St. John Paul II said to teachers, that the ad limina visits of these bishops in 1998, the greatest challenge to Catholic education in the United States today, and the greatest contribution that authentically Catholic education can make to American culture, is to restore to that culture the conviction that human beings can grasp the truth of things. And in grasping that truth, they can know their duties to God, to themselves, and to their neighbors. That the greatest contribution we can make is restore the understanding, the conviction that we can grasp the truth of things. The truth exists, that we can know it, and we can communicate that to others. It's pretty ironic that even in the world of education, that those three things, those three statements are pretty hotly contested. That truth exists, that we can know it, and we can communicate the truth to others. Why are we teaching if we don't think those things are true? I'm not sure. But to see that this is what our schools are for, this is what education is for, to know our duties to God, to ourselves, and to others. That truth, that logos, is Jesus Christ, a person, the divine person, the personified truth who attracts the world to himself. And every other truth is a fragment of the truth that he is and refers to him. And I saw in a classroom today where the class, there it was doing addition of mixed numbers and simplifying fractions because I always think of fractions when I see this. I don't know why. Maybe just because I like teaching math. But I love to tell students this when we just finished mastering, adding mixed numbers, for example, and going, every other truth is a fragment of the truth that Jesus Christ is and refers to him. And typically my students might give me a look like, you're crazy, Miss Richards. But over time, they start to absorb that. They really do, and they start to see it for themselves. And they'll come in and say something like, Miss Richards, I knew more Jesus yesterday. What are you talking about? Well, when we were dividing fractions, I know how to do it now. I said, yeah, you're right. You know more Jesus now. That's right. I'd just like to share this is a great diagram to show about the philosophy of this type of education. Because every form of education has a philosophy at its basis, at its foundation. Every system of education has that, whether it's stated or unstated, whether the teachers know it or not, whether the students know it or not. And the one that we embrace has God at the center. And that truth is defined by God. Truth comes from God, exudes from God. And the knowledge of subjects, as we do in school, and the knowledge of things, including ourselves, is unified and rational and consistent. There's a single truth that's ordering the whole universe. There's a single rational principle that orders the whole universe. And we know as Christians that it is our triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But modern education has a very different philosophy, whether it's articulated or not. And in modern education, public education, I hate to say it, sometimes in Catholic education, man is put at the center of reality. And truth, then, is relative to man. We hear this. That's your truth. That's my truth. I'm going to speak my truth. And that knowledge of subjects or things, including ourselves, is random, detached, and changing. And every time I look at this slide, it makes me sad. Because I think of that man in the center, who's actually the student in our classroom, your son or your daughter, who's in this, if they're in this type of education. And boy, they are so vulnerable to so many evils. That knowledge of subjects or things is random, detached, and changing. Life is hard enough. Life is hard enough. And I just think about those, even if in our own communities, even ourselves, when we struggle with anxiety and we struggle with depression and things, for goodness sake, we have this going for us. We know, we know that God is God, and we know that the world makes sense. And instead, boy, this poor soul is in a really, really tough spot. So we need our students to grow up and do this and share this message with others. What do we teach in these schools? Well, heaven and earth are full of his glory. So, what we think of as science is the content of the world God made, but also in history in a very strong way. That's his story. We know it began, that God created the world in whatever manner he chose to do it, but God created it. We know he's going to come again at the end of time, and we also know there's a center, that God entered our world, he became incarnate, he became one of us. And all of our individual stories and the stories of countries and city-states and all of that, and kings and queens and ordinary folks, right? Like our students themselves, all of our stories are part of that grand story, and every student has an important role to play in helping them discover what that role is. There it is. This is a timeline. These people should really pay me a sponsorship or something, because this is a product that I'm promoting. But it's a 23-foot-long timeline. Great thing that I used to have in my own classroom. And it shows what I just described, that there's the beginning. It shows the whole genealogy of coming up before the birth of Christ. That circle is where you see Christ on the cross, who then rose from the dead, ascends to his Father. And it doesn't have the ending on it because it's only stuff that's happened so far. But it comes up to pretty much the modern day, about the year 2000. Beautiful thing for our students to study, because they start to think, what is it that I'm supposed to do? What's God calling me to do? So we reclaim our story, the saints, their contributions, and St. Thomas' philosophy, St. Albert, who was bishop, but also a natural scientist. You've got the beautiful works of art, stained glass and St. Michael, and you see Peter there receiving the keys from our Lord. We got the Divine Comedy in there twice. The great works of music, of architecture, of art were really done for the glory of God. And I'd love to share this pledge with folks such as yourself, because I think I'd invite you even to recite it with me, at least if you're close enough to read it. But I'll read it out loud to you. This again comes from Holy Innocents, and I believe originally came from St. Jerome's. But the Scholars' Pledge they make every day. I pledge to seek the truth and to love all that is good and beautiful. I will strive to achieve clarity of thought, nobility of character, and purity of heart. I will pursue my education with diligence, humility, and sincerity, embracing excellence and renouncing mediocrity. I will treat my teachers and peers with the utmost dignity and respect. I will honor myself and my family by giving my best effort daily. I will honor God by developing the gifts that he has given me to the best of my ability. Above all, I will aspire to the wisdom of a life lived in faith, hope, and charity, fulfilling my destiny as a child of God. I first heard about this pledge from one of the dads whose daughter was in TK, 4 years old. And when they went to remote learning and the Zoom thing, and they did their morning assembly online, he said, he and his wife and the little one would stand up in front of the computer screen, and she could recite the whole thing by heart. And he said, I just was blown away that she could even know these words. And when I'd ask her about it, she had a general sense of what she was really pledging to. And as a teacher and head of school, I'm sure you know, Jerry, that we're helping students all day long who, fall short sometimes, right? The incident at recess or whatever it is, right? Your parents, too. But what a thing to go back to and say, let's look at the pledge. What do you want to work on? What is it you want to do better tomorrow, right? It's a beautiful thing as we're trying to help these young ones to educate their humanity, to bring them to know God, not only in a religion class and not only on Sunday, but to have that integrated life of beauty and truth and goodness that's just with them all the time. Aristotle, pictured here in this image of the School of Athens, said, all men by nature desire to know. And this image appears in many of our member schools across the country. It represents, the search for truth, the classical, seeking to know the truth. But when you go to the Papal Palace where this is painted on the wall by Raphael, it's one wall of 4. And on the 2 sides are pictured, they're painted also by Raphael, images representing beauty and goodness. But the really neat thing that my good friend, our executive director, Elizabeth Sullivan, told me is when she was there and was contemplating the 2 figures in the center, who are Aristotle and Plato, she was looking at how they appear to be walking forward. Where are they going in this search for truth? And eventually she turned around and looked at what they were facing and what they were walking toward. And it's this one by Raphael, Disputation of the Holy Sacrament. They're walking toward that other transcendental, the One, right? That one, that divine one who loved us so much, he became man and stays with us now in the Blessed Sacrament. The angels and saints, all heaven and earth adore him. So if we're educating humanity, I think the people in this room who are listening to this video know it's not really about the test scores. It's about knowing Christ, knowing themselves, and knowing one another. As we see in 1 John, he gives us our tell us, puts it out. Beloved, we are God's children now. It does not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So I would really like to hear from you, whether it's questions, it may be about general things. We mostly talked about general things. It may be about specific things. It might be your comments, but I really just want to open it up for some conversation. So don't be shy. Yes. Sure. So Mr. Capps mentioned, what does it mean? What does less is more mean relative to the curriculum at a school like this, right? Especially in literature or history. Less is more is very, very true. We want our students to be able, I'll put it this way. I feel very strongly, I know very clearly that we are trying to teach our students to judge things well. And while the world wants to say, don't judge me, don't judge anything, well, the reality is we are called upon to judge constantly. We are called upon to assess ourselves constantly and judge whether did I just do right or did I just do wrong, right? How can we improve ourselves? So I'm getting your question, really. So we're constantly forming our students' judgment. One thing about that is we cannot judge something that we don't know thoroughly. So in any history course you want to choose, no matter how limited the scope, you're not going to have time to do everything. That's one of the problems with modern education is trying to do everything. One American history teacher told me his history book has 53 chapters in it. They're 36 weeks in the school year? I mean, obviously impossible. So instead, what we really encourage teachers to do is for the teacher himself or herself to know this thread, this historical narrative that they're trying to pass on to their students, and then to choose thematically, what are the areas that I really need my students to dive in deeply? I really want them to know well what the founding of the United States of America was all about, for example. The students would be very much better served to know that very well than to know all the dates of all the intolerable acts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they should learn dates too, but the idea is that to know something well means then I'm better able to make judgments about it. Right? And so it gives them that deep knowledge, but it's also a habit of thought. The other thing I have learned is that I cannot judge something that I don't know well. And it's important for me to know certain things well. And also I think it teaches them that we have to make choices, right? To choose is to renounce. So when I choose to dive deeply into the founding of the country, there's something else in the table of contents that has to go. Because they're not going to come to school all summer. Does that help? Yes. Exactly, that in order to go deeply into this, I have to leave something else out. And so, one thing that a lot of teachers might do is kind of a culminating project at the end of the year. They might say, all right, you're each going to do your individual research project, and here's a list of 10 suggested topics. Or maybe this is your list to choose from. Or maybe you give them some choice. And then they present to one another. But an advantage to that is that you're exposing their students to all these things that they should also want to know. And when you say out loud to your class, I wish we had time to go deeper into this, because man, I love the story about John Brown. And then and say it to them right before Christmas vacation. Say it a few times. Make it a teacher propaganda campaign, because what you're doing is you are fostering wonder in your students. Like, oh, Mr. Capps thinks this is really important. And then, see what they come back with. I know one teacher who asked her second graders, it was the pastor of the parish, who was pushing the second grade teacher to do the funeral oration of Mark Antony from Julius Caesar with second graders. And the teacher was like, okay, Father, well, maybe next year. Okay, Father, maybe next year. Well, he finally just pushed, and she knew she had to do what Father was asking. So she brought it up with her class and started talking about the story of Julius Caesar. They had already been learning that in past years. But she brought out this text of this funeral oration, and they started talking about it and kind of reciting the first couple lines to learn them and learn what they mean. Well, then they had a blizzard, and school shut down for 4 days, I think it was. And when they came back to school, one of the second graders said, Mrs. Jones, I know that thing you gave us. She goes, what thing, honey? What are you talking about? That thing, Julius Caesar. Oh, you learned your lines? Good. Tell them to me. And the child starts reciting. And she doesn't stop at line 2 or line 10 or line 20. She knew the entire thing. And they had already been discussing the story of Julius Caesar and so on. And then the teacher said, okay, class, come listen to what Susie has learned while she was home for 4 days. And they all did it, and they get excited about what they can learn, right? So that, getting back to what you just brought up, that we have to cut things out, let's also consider this as an opportunity to help our students grow in wonder and that desire to learn and know. Who else has been thinking about something out there? Yes? Oh, good, from the chat. Okay, so the question references the work of John Sr., who was one of the main characters in the Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas. If I'm wrong and you know the answer, please tell me. But anyway, he's certainly, at the college level, he was very much promoting this Integrated Humanities program, was very much in the same mission as what we were talking about here at the St. Austin School. But it was not limited to academics, as this listener indicated. He talked about, what were some of the things he said? Farming, sewing, I know they did dance, music, home economics. Yeah, they would go out, as part of their coursework, they would go out and look at the stars. They would do really everything, all these things that really make us fully human. I'd really recommend reading the works of John Sr. and studying that Integrated Humanities program. You will totally fall in love with it. One thing that John Sr., I remember hearing about him, is that his students would study in the classroom. They would study the great books, and we think of this, canon of these great works worth our time. But one thing he mentioned was that his students were not really ready for the great books, for the 100 or so great books, because they had never read the 1,000 or so good books. So a good thing to do at one of these schools, any of these schools, is to look that up. There's a list. You can look it up. John Sr., 1,000 good books. And there are all these books for children, some of the titles that you saw on the screen here, and others as well, to really get those in the hands of your students. I've seen them sorted by grade level, and you might need to just be attentive to see if your students are there yet or not. There are some pretty challenging ones, but beautiful, beautiful good works. And I think it also ties in with, for example, you have Montessori program here. A lot of Montessori learning is very similar also to what John Sr. has said. And getting them outside, having a garden. I don't know if Destiny's ready to tear up some of the parking lot, make a garden yet, but you'll find a place to do that. You'll find a way to do that in some situation. But we are really educating all of humanity, and it is not just academics. So the listener is right. Another one?
Yes. How do you
I don't hear your mic. Just speak up.
How do you connect STEM capabilities of a student with humanities?
So how do you connect STEM capabilities of a student with humanities? This is a really important question because as parents, parents are being told all the time, STEM is what is important, or STREAM, or whatever else they're calling it now. And like, as we know, these devices are getting into the hands of every single student. I used to go to the parents at St. John Bosco who I knew were themselves IT professionals, who were the computer programmers, et cetera, and ask them, why do you have your kids here? Why aren't you afraid that your children, at our school, they had no tech at all. Is that the case here? Yeah, no tech at all. And aren't you concerned that your child is going to be cut off from possible STEM career? Maybe that's what they're made for. And I universally got the same type of answer, which was, they have plenty of time to learn that stuff. They have plenty of time. I need them to be forming those habits of mind where they know how to learn. I need them to learn how to think, to learn how to learn what does it mean to be human first. Learning a tech language, to those parents at least, seemed like a really minimal amount of knowledge to gain, and certainly not as worthwhile. Another thing I wanted to mention too is many of our schools teach Latin, as I witnessed here at the St. Austin School today. Latin, of course, is, well, I shouldn't say of course, not everybody knows this. Latin is, it's a complicated language. It's, maybe I should say a complex language. Not only are the, and I have not studied Latin myself, but not only are the verbs conjugated, but the nouns all have all these different cases too. So when I learned Spanish, I had to learn all these tenses for verbs. When you're studying Latin, you're learning all these declensions as well, how the nouns change and how this has a different meaning in the sentence because of the ending. So it's a highly complex language that benefits our students in many, many ways, but it teaches them how to learn language. And when you think of those people who are fluent in 4, 5, 6, 7 languages, they learn how to learn language. Well, getting back to the STEM question, it's about language. The computer programming thing is about language. How does language work? And how can I use that language to accomplish this particular purpose? So I've also had some really great conversations with parents relating that way as well.
Considered adult literature, like the Divine Comedy and the Iliad, to children at such young ages? Are there other more child-level works that are considered classical that could be as effective in conveying some of the adult ideas presented in more mature works?
Okay, I might need you to repeat it a little slower. I did hear, why would we put adult literature, give that to younger kids? Keep going, but slower.
Why would you introduce that adult literature to children at such young ages? Are there other more child-level works that are considered classical that could be as effective?
To answer the second question, yes, absolutely. And I think a great place to start is that John Sr. list of 1,000 good books. I'd highly recommend that. I know when I mentioned the Divine Comedy as an example, that was one of those days where I just shook my head and go, I had no idea what was going to happen when I hired this girl, but look what God is doing. So there are a lot of works where students will sometimes they will study a higher level text in a lower level class, and in those cases I've been amazed, really, by what those students actually can do, that what they really can do. And it makes me think of how myself as a student, I don't know why, but we weren't exposed to those things, not in school, and I had the sense that, oh, I'm not able to read those things. something I can't handle or something, which isn't true. Now, a teacher does have to be discerning, certainly. Sometimes students, I've seen adaptations being used well. A different fourth grade teacher, the other one moved up grade levels. Different fourth grade teacher was teaching modern history in her class, and she had her students read an adaptation of Les Miserables. So it was something that was or even a little bit easy for them as fourth graders. Les Miserables, a lot of action in that story. It was a children's version of that story, and it had so much to do with the themes of justice and mercy that came up frequently in her curriculum. So that's why she chose to use it, and she did it very beautifully because in addition to the students really using this kind of easy text to learn how to have good discussions about these stories, she would also take the original translation of the Victor Hugo work, and she would read them original passages from Victor Hugo's work. And so here they know the general story. They're hearing this beautiful, rich literature now of just this passage. You know what we read last night about such and such? Well, here's the original version. And there was a beautiful exposure that they got to the richness of that language, of that story. So those are some of the reasons that it often is done, but as the listener points out, I would agree. You do want to keep them at grade level too. One thing that I would say is different between modern literature for young people and the kind that we want to give our students is a lot of the modern literature is, what would I say? Depicting real life in all of its brokenness and going, this is okay. It's okay that, your family is broken, like here's this family in this book that's broken, and that's okay. And, I think there's a good intention there that somebody wants to make sure these kids feel good about themselves and about life. But instead, what we really try to do, what we like to do, is to give students stories about things that are high and noble and virtuous and heroic. Not every school is going to be about heroes, all right? But certainly a lot of them are. And why? Because when students when they have their imagination formed by these stories of noble characters doing heroic things, all right, or having human struggles and making tough decisions, but putting in their full self, really, to sacrifice themselves out of love for others, they get this vision of what ought to be, And as they mature, they also gain more and more knowledge of what really is, right? And there's a gap between what is and what ought to be. But that's where inspiration happens, between what is and what ought to be, right? That's, again, finding their place in history. This should be better. This shouldn't be this way. What are you going to do about it? It's kind of a different approach to, we see students being pushed into a certain type of activism in modern world, which I don't think is good. Well, students learning to take action for the good is very good. And giving them real heroes and giving them these beautiful examples is one way to do it, whatever the literature choice. Any other comments or questions? Yes? No, that's a great question. That students have all different, in any classroom, you have students with all different aptitudes and abilities in front of you, and the teachers in the room know this very well. What I have seen as the difference is that in this classical liberal arts education, it is so deeply human. The academic content itself is so rooted in things that matter to us, is that it engages students' interest at a much higher level. And right there, you're starting to close the learning gap, right there. Now, as far as students who have an IEP, individualized education plan, perhaps there's a learning disability, parents have questions about that. Whatever supports your child has in their IEP before it was a classical school or before your child came to a classical school, they're going to have all of those same supports in the IEP once they go to a classical school. So all those supports, consultant teachers, services, et cetera, those don't go away. What I found as a school leader is I started working with those service providers differently, asking them to we would talk more about the approaches they were using. I don't really want that student to be handed an iPad for half an hour and that's their service time, because that happens. All right, so we would have those conversations so the education just spreads. But in general, we found that the content is so engaging that those students just do better naturally, like the kid saying, "Don't tell us."
One more question from online.
Yes.
The questioner says, STEM is more than computer language. It is engineering and sciences. Do humanities help with ethical decisions in STEM-related expertise?
Okay, so I missed one part. It is not only languages, it is something and science.
It's more than computer language. It is engineering and sciences. And then do humanities help with ethical decisions in the STEM field?
With what decisions?
Ethical decisions?
Ethical decisions? Absolutely. Yeah, I think the listener hit the answer right on the target. So, right, as we've been discussing, that all of this kind of education is geared for how can I live the human life that I'm called to live? How can I live a good human life, the good life? How can I do that? Not in terms of how many cars are in my garage, but in terms of what does it mean to be human and how am I fulfilling that? So the student who carries that into any field is the one person in the room, maybe the one person in the company who thinks like that, right? Should we use technology to do this? I mean, that's a huge question in just about many, many applications that we hear about in the news and read about in magazines. Should we use technology to do this? Should we change the human DNA so that person is something that has been biologically engineered? Is that something we should do? All right, that's a STEM question. It's not a computer question. Should we, so many things in medicine. Should we do cloning if that means that somebody can have an arm who didn't have an arm before? Should we do, all of these questions that are deeply human questions? We're in big trouble when the technology gets out ahead of our understanding of what does it mean to be human. So I think that listener really provided the answer. It's the ethical, knowing the human side of it that is so very valuable. Something you're thinking about, maybe thought you would hear about tonight, but didn't yet. Yes? Sure. It's a combination of things, really. I mean, some of it is really basic, like in classical schools, we emphasize memory, therefore students learn their math facts by heart, right? I mean, that's pretty basic. Everybody used to do it, and it's a good thing to do. So there's that. Another way of bringing this in is really bringing in the story of the mathematicians themselves, of the scientists themselves. A lesson I just did with a faculty recently is we took a book written for kids about Archimedes, and it was where he claimed that he could move the earth itself if he had a lever and a place on which to stand. And the king challenged him to move that ship over there, right? And so there's a whole story about this, about how Archimedes thought, how he set it up, how the people all made fun of him, and you're not going to be able to do this, and how, sure enough, he moved the ship out to sea the ship that had been loaded down with cargo and passengers besides. So there's the story of the people. And that goes along with history, and that goes along with this idea of all of the truth has a unity about it. The other thing that I really like to do as well is to bring in some of the, and I've done this kind of a way of peppering it into the class. I haven't myself threaded it the whole way through, but what I like to do is bring some very basic things to the math class occasionally and say, okay, today we're going to do something different. Put your math book away. You know, we hand out the compasses and have my students try to make a circle. It's pretty hard when you haven't really done it before. And as they kind of get the hang of it and swing around, we say, can you make a perfect one? And some of them think they can, you know, but my point is, no, you can't. So I'm going to go out and look for all the flaws, and every single one of them has a flaw. And I ask them, have you ever seen a perfect circle? I say, well, the sun's a perfect circle. Oh, really? Have you ever seen solar flares? Well, what if you cut down a tree and, you know, then there's a circle? I said, come on, look at tree trunks. They're not really circular. Well, how about a telephone pole? All right, let's cut one of those down in your imagination. Is it a perfect circle? Well, what about a machine? You know, something's done by a machine. I don't know. If I had a really powerful microscope, telescope strength microscope to look at that, do you think it's absolutely perfectly circular? Well, no. Say, how do you know? Well, because it's made by people and it's never really going to be perfect. I said, but do you know what a perfect circle is? Yeah. How do you know that? Well, I learned it in kindergarten, they say. So, but you didn't see a perfect circle in kindergarten because you've never seen a perfect circle. Well, I don't know, I just know. And we start having a conversation like that, and pretty soon we're kind of entering into the realm of philosophy a little bit, and just having the students kind of ponder some questions that they never really thought about before, but things that kept some of those ancient Greeks pretty well occupied for good portions of their lifetime, right? It's just a tiny little seed that I plant, you know, in the life of my students, where they go, I really want to learn Euclid. So those are a few examples of things that I try to do. Some of it's story, some of it's not. Kind of bring it in. Mathematics has become very utilitarian. And we're kind of on a group project right now, a group quest of how to address that in the right way. Who else? Any thoughts? Yes. Well, I know that the factual answer to that is we're going upstream, but I'll tell you that the culture within these schools, like the St. Austin School, like the school I was head of, it has its own momentum. And what became very clear to me just in the first year at St. John Bosco where I was, that, wow, things just happen in this place. God really wants to bless this school. We needed something, somebody showed up the door, and there it was. And I really have come to the conclusion, I'll tell you God's thoughts, I really think that God wants this. I really think that this kind of project really pleases him. This search, genuine search for beauty, truth, and goodness in the light of Christ for the sake of his kingdom, I think that pleases him very much, and it has a very powerful momentum behind it. I mentioned a little earlier to a few that our institute has a small team. We're finding that the demand for this is growing so much. There's so many people I have to say, no, I can't come out then, I'm already booked. No, I can't come out then, I'm already booked. That we're hiring consultants, people who've been working with us for years and really, really starting to learn how to do this so that it can spread more. So I don't feel like we're going upstream. We probably are, but I hardly notice it, because the momentum is here. So I'm happy to talk with anybody after, if that would be helpful to you. It's been a pleasure so far, this visit to the St. Austin School. I really look forward to working with the teachers tomorrow. And I just thank you for the support that you give to this school and to this mission and to these little boys and girls, your sons and daughters, who I believe that in this way, they're going to be able to draw closer and closer to what does it really mean to be fully human and flourish in that way. So thank you.
Okay, I just want to say thank you so much, Colleen. I look so forward to being with you all day tomorrow with the faculty. Looking forward to a beautiful day. You said so much this evening and gave us so much food for thought. So I'm grateful that you're here and you were able to speak with our parents and our school community. What a beautiful thing. So again, thanks for being here, and to all of you, thanks for being here. All of you who are online, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to our next speaker series. We'll be in touch, and we will give you information in the future on that. Thank you all. God bless. Have a wonderful evening.